Dealings with the Dead, number 20. How shall we deal with the dead? We have considered the usages of many nations in different ages of the world. Some of these usages appear sufficiently revolting, especially such as relate to secondary burial, or the transfer of the dead, from their primary resting places to vast miscellaneous receptacles. The desire is almost universal that when summoned to lie down in the grave, the dead may never be disturbed by the hand of man, that our remains may return quietly to dust, unobserved by mortal eye. There is no part of this humiliating process that is not painful and revolting to the beholder. Some people actually believe that there's a bone that doesn't decompose, and the actual mythological references is that we can be reconstructed even if there's a part. It can be reconstructed from the very bone that tends to survive cremation. But, then they break up that bone, don't they? When they make it into dust, right? Of this, the ancients had the same impression. Cremation and embalming set corruption and the worm at defiance. Other motives, I'm aware, have been assigned for the former. The execution of popular vengeance upon the poor remains of those whose memory has become odious during a revolution is not uncommon. A ludicrous example of this occurred when Santa Anna became unpopular, and the furious mob seized his leg, which had been amputated, embalmed, and deposited among the public treasures, and cooled their savage anger by kicking the miserable member all over the city of Montezuma. In the time of Sylla, cremation was not so common as interment, but Sylla, remembering the indignity he had offered to the body of Marius, enjoined that his own body should be burnt. There was doubtless another motive for this practice among the ancients. The custom prevailed extensively at one time of burying the dead in the cellars of houses. I have already referred to the Theban law, which required the construction of a suitable receptacle for the dead in every house. Interment certainly preceded cremation. Caro de Legibus, Book 2, asserts that the interment prevailed among the Athenians in the time of Cecrops, their first king. In the earlier days of Rome, both were employed. Numa was buried in conformity with a special clause in his will. Remus, as Ovid, Faust 4, 356 asserts, was burnt. The accumulation of dead bodies in cellars or subcellars must have become intolerable. This practice undoubtedly gave rise to the whole system of household gods. Laurus, the Mures, Larva, and Manus also relates to the word Baal, if we're going to use a Northern Semitic term. Such an accumulation of ancestors, it may well be supposed, left precious little room for the amphora of Hyan, Lesbian, and Falernian. Young aspirants sometimes inwardly opine that their living ancestors take up too much room. Such was very naturally the opinion of the ancients in relation to the dead. Like Francois Pampraca, they began to feel the necessity of condensation, and cremation came to be more commonly adopted. The bones of a human being reduced to ashes require but little room and not much more, though the decomposition by fire be not quite perfect. Let me say to those who think I prefer cremation as a substitute for interment that I do not. It has been found little favor for many centuries. It seems to have been employed in the case of Shelley, the poet. Power desirable, and the remains of the dead were to be deposited in the dwelling houses of the living. Cremation and urn burial are quite unnecessary wherever there is no want of ground for cemeteries in proper locations. The funeral urns of the ancients were of different sizes and forms, and of materials more or less costly, according to the ability and taste of the surviving friends. Ammianus Marcellinus relates that Gombratus, king of Chaonia, near Persia, burnt the body of his son and placed the ashes in a silver urn. Mr. Wedgwood had the celebrated Portland vase in his possession for a year, and made casts of it. This was the vase which had been in possession of the Barberini family for nearly 2 centuries, and for which the Duke of Portland gave Mr. Hamilton 1,000 guineas. In the minds of very many, the idea of a considerable size has been associated with this vase, yet in fact it is about 10 inches high and 6 broad. The Wedgwood casts may be seen in many of our glass and china shops. This vase was discovered about the middle of the 16th century, 2.5 miles from Rome, on the Frascati Road, in a marble sarcophagus within a sepulchral chamber. This, doubtless, was a funeral urn. The urns dug up in Old Walsingham in 1658 were quite similar in form to the Portland vase, excepting that they were without ears. Some 50 were found in a sandy soil about 3 feet deep, a short distance from an old Roman garrison, and only 5 miles from Brancaster, the ancient Brandodunum. 4 of these vases are figured in Brown's Hydriotaphia. Some of them contained about 2 pounds of bones, several were of the capacity of a gallon, and some of half that size. It may seem surprising that a human body can be reduced to such a compass. How the bulk of a man should sink into so few pounds of bones and ashes may seem strange unto any who consider not its constitution. How slender a mass will remain upon an open and urging fire of the carnal composition. Even bones themselves, reduced to ashes, do abate a noble proportion. Such are the words of good old Sir Thomas. It was an adage of old, that he that lies in a golden urn will find no quiet for his bones. If the costliness of the material offered no temptation to the avarice of man, still after centuries have given them the stamp of antiquity. These urns and their contents become precious in the eyes of the lovers of virtue. There is no security from impertinent meddling with our remains, so certain as a speedy conversion into indistinguishable dust. Sir Thomas Brown, manifestly inclined to cremation, to be gnawed, says he, out of our graves, to have our skulls made drinking bowls and our bones turned into pipes, to delight and sport our enemies, are tragical abominations, escaped in burning bodies. Well, it's not always against the corpse to do that sort of stuff, but, not advocating that either, right? Such anticipations are certainly unpleasant. An ingenious device was adopted by Alaricus. He appointed the spot for his grave and directed that the course of a river should be so changed as to flow over it. It has been said that certain soils possess a preserving quality. I am inclined to think the secret commonly lies in some peculiar constitutional quality in the dead subject, for wherever cases of remarkable preservation have occurred, corruption has been found generally to have done its full day's work on all around. If such quality really existed in the soil, it is certainly undesirable. Those who were opposed to the evacuation of the cemetery de Ennesen in the 16th century attempted to set up in its favor the improbable pretension that it consumed bodies in 9 days. Burton, in his description of Leicestershire, states that the body of Thomas, Marquis of Dorset, was found perfect and nothing corrupted, the flesh not hardened but in color, proportion, and softness, like an ordinary corpse newly to be interred after 78 years' burial. A remarkable case of post-hominis preservation occurred in a village near Boston. The very exalted character of the professional gentleman who examined the corpse after it had been entombed for 40 years gives the interest of authenticity to the statement. Justice Fuller, the father-in-law of that political victim, General William Hull, who was neither a coward nor a traitor, was buried in a family tomb in Newton Center. It was ascertained and from time to time reported that the body remained uncorrupted and entire. Mr. Fuller was about 80 when he died and very corpulent. About 40 years after his burial, Dr. John C. Warren, by permission of the family with the physician of the village and other gentlemen, examined the body of Mr. Fuller. The coffin was somewhat decomposed, so were the burial clothes. The body presented everywhere a natural skin excepting on one leg, on which there had been an ulcer. Their decomposition had taken place. The skin was generally of a dark brown color and hard like dried leather, and so well preserved about the face that persons present with Dr. Warren said that they should have recognized the features of Justice Fuller. My business lies not with the psychology, not with the physiology, however curious the speculation may be. Were it possible by any means to perpetuate the dead in a similar manner, it would be wholly undesirable. Dust we are, and unto dust must we return. The question is still before us. How shall we deal with